How many of you have heard something like this before? It's just weed. It's not addictive. Come on, man, it's not that big of a deal. It's just pot. It's natural. It comes from the earth. Today, I'd like you to challenge your ideas about cannabis. I'd like to tell you why cannabis is and can be an addictive substance. First things first, I'd like to ask you, if you use cannabis or have thought about using cannabis, wouldn't you like to be armed with the facts about what it can do to you? Wouldn't you like to know if you could get addicted to it? The truth of the matter is that cannabis can be addictive. Before we jump into my argument, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. When I was 15 years old, I started using cannabis. I quickly developed a dependence to the drug. I was diagnosed with cannabis dependence disorder in high school, and it made my high school life very difficult. I encountered social problems, emotional problems, and other psychological problems. By the time I was 19, I had had enough, and I decided to get clean. I have now been clean for nearly 8 years. So what I'd like you to know before we start getting into the main points of my argument is that first, I'm going to talk about how cannabis use can move from a recreational use to a dependent use. Second, I'm going to talk about how cannabis dependence is one of a psychological and emotional nature. Lastly, I'd like to talk about what happens when individuals who use cannabis stop using cannabis, what withdrawal symptoms they can experience, and why long-term remission can be a difficult thing to achieve. So first, let's talk about recreational use versus dependent use. According to the CDC, cannabis use often starts recreationally. However, regular or ongoing use can make cannabis a form of escape for some individuals. When stressors are added to this equation, the use can become maladaptive and lead individuals to self-medicate with the drug. That leads us to talking about why the dependence on cannabis is one of an emotional and psychological nature. According to Munoz-Gallin, cannabis dependence is often co-occurring with other psychological disorders. When the drug is used to combat other mental health issues, a dependence often arises. When these things are at play, the dependence becomes one of an emotional and psychological nature. Although you may think of drug addiction as being one where the physical withdrawal symptoms are so severe that an individual has to keep using, often it looks very different. In the case of cannabis, it's the emotional dependence that keeps people who use coming back. So what happens when you stop? Let's talk a little bit about something called post-acute withdrawal syndrome. According to the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation, post-acute withdrawal syndrome refers to a group of symptoms that can linger for weeks or even months after you stop using. In the case of cannabis dependence, these symptoms include irritability, difficulty sleeping, loss of appetite, and severe cravings. The thing is that this makes achieving long-term remission very difficult. When the symptoms are so severe, individuals often return to use. So what have we learned from this? First, often recreational use can transform into dependent use. Second, cannabis dependence is not always physical, but often of an emotional, psychological nature. And lastly, we've learned why recovery from cannabis dependence can be so difficult. With post-acute withdrawal syndrome, the return to use is a common occurrence. So what? What I'd like you to do, and what I'd like you to take away from this presentation, is a new idea about cannabis and cannabis dependence. If you already use cannabis, what I'd like you to do is honestly analyze your relationship with it. Ask yourself, Is this healthy? And if you don't use cannabis, you might be presented with the opportunity to. Before you go into it, really think about what you've learned. Think about the fact that it's not always okay and dependence can arise. Personally, I had to reanalyze my relationship with cannabis, and it was a difficult thing to do. But through my recovery, I've come to fully realize that I was addicted to cannabis. Thank you.